Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Overwatch League fan thoughts and analysis video. Today it is for Stage 3, Week 5, the Atlanta Reign homestand. But before we jump into those matches, let's take a look back at the matches from Week 4 of Stage 3. Very good week for me, 13-1. Believe that's my best record on a week yet. So I'm not going to focus too heavily on every match. I'm just going to kind of run through them all real quick, and I'll focus on ones that I want to focus on. Spark versus Valiant. Spark walk away with the win. That was my big pick game of the week. Very good match for both sides. Very close match. Spark very much looking like a top 4, even potentially top 3 team right now. But we'll get back to that in a little bit. But the Spark look very good. They're winning good games. They're winning well, and I think it's really important to understand how good the Spark are right now, because they are one of the teams that could definitely win Stage 3 finals. Dynasty beat the Eternal. No big surprise there. Chengdu Hunters beat the San Francisco Shock. Shock are very much struggling this stage. They're getting some bad losses, and then they're bouncing back and getting good wins sometimes, but and they are. They lost to the Hunters, and then they bounced back and beat the Spitfire. We'll get to that. They lost to the Outlaws and then bounced back and beat the Seoul Dynasty. But they're not playing consistently. And when teams are running stuff that's weird or that they're not prepared for, that they just isn't kind of what they're used to seeing, they're faltering and they're stumbling and they're struggling. I don't think the Shock right now are looking all that great. I don't think they're a top 3 team in this stage right now. I think they're probably number 4. I think they're the best of the teams that isn't looking very good right now in this meta, but I think you have to look at Vancouver, New York, and Hangzhou as the 3 best teams right now in this meta, because I think they're the 3 that are playing the best. And that's very important, I think, right now when you look at how the season's going to be going forward, especially if these rumors about role lock are true. Friday, a big pick game was the Valiant versus the Spitfire. Not even a close match. Valiant absolutely obliterated the Spitfire. Valiant look very strong right now, so they locked themselves a stage playoff spot there. The Spark had locked themselves a stage playoff spot, I think, with their Thursday win, but if not, it was with their Saturday win. And Houston Outlaws beat the Washington Justice, bounced back from their loss to the Florida Mayhem. Pretty solid wins for all 3 of those teams. Nothing really surprising there, but I guess the Valiant's big win over a team like London, who's been relatively good so far this season, especially in Stage 2 when they were looking okay at the beginning of Stage 3, but they've kind of fallen off a little bit. But the Valiant have been looking very strong. Moving on to Saturday, we have New York versus the Dallas Fuel. That was a much closer match than I think people were expecting. It went all the way to 5 maps with the New York NYXL reverse sweeping the Dallas Fuel. A lot of people have been taking that as a way to criticize New York. And I think it is valid to criticize New York for losing a match, or for not losing a match, for having to go the distance against some of these teams that aren't really looking all that great. They went the distance with Dallas, 5 maps. They pretty much, they went the distance in Houston. We didn't really know how good Houston was at the time. They went the distance against London after 4-0ing them 2 weeks prior. So they've been going the distance a lot this stage. But a match like the one against Dallas, I think the thing that I don't think people talk about enough is when you reverse sweep a team, and if you reverse sweep consistently, that's a sign of a couple good things. It's the sign of really good coaching, it's a sign of really good mentality, and it's a sign of just very talented players. There's a reason why New York has had a lot of reverse sweeps and has won a lot of map 5s in going back to last season. And it's because they don't get caught up as heavily into pressure, especially in regular season matches. When you start getting to the playoffs and stage playoffs and whatnot, you can kind of tell that they start to struggle a little bit more. Not entirely, obviously. They reverse swept Philadelphia Fusion in the Stage 2 playoff last year, but I think the ability to reverse sweep teams as consistently as New York does and win map 5s as consistently as New York does, it's a sign of a very good team. The Dallas Fuel threw an incredible curveball in New York. New York was not expecting what they got. And I know a lot of people are going to say, okay, yeah, but they showed against Dallas, who played Trill instead of OG, that played Taimu, didn't play AKM, and they played a very weird roster. They did that because they were confident in that roster's ability to beat New York. Because New York is a team that runs the same stuff. New York doesn't really change what they're doing over the course of a week, right? New York is going to run something that works, and they're going to use it, and they're going to win with it. And when they stop winning with it, that's when they're going to change it up. And they're still winning with it. Now, maybe they'll make some tweaks and whatnot here and there to kind of improve upon it. But Dallas knew they were going to be running the somber go to the SBB. So what does New York do? They run the somber go to the SBB. But they go in at halftime, they make some adjustments, and they rally behind it, and they win. It's something that New York does that a lot of teams don't do. And there's a lot of people that I'm seeing still putting the Shock ahead of New York in this stage because New York has struggled this stage. New York hasn't lost a match yet this stage. They're undefeated. They're the only team so far that hasn't lost a match. They have 2 matches left at the Atlanta homestand. We'll get to those. But I think people are really just kind of looking at New York, and I don't know. I just think they're writing them off because they have played some close matches with some teams. I just don't agree with that. Obviously, I am a New York fan, so there's obviously a little bit of bias there. But I just think that notion is a little ridiculous, and I think that New York has really looked strong this meta. And overall, they still only have 2 losses on the season when you consider the regular season and not stage playoffs. So this is a team that is 1 game behind Vancouver in the standings. Yet people are still bashing them, and people are looking at them and saying they're not a very strong team. But that ends my rant. Let's move on to the next game from Saturday, which is the Boston Uprising taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. That was my big pick game of the week, and the Fusion win that one in 5 maps, if I remember correctly. Very close series, but the Fusion walk away with the win. The Hangzhou Spark take on the Florida Mayhem. A victory for the Spark. If the win over the Valiant didn't lock them over the playoffs, this one did. Finally, the Shanghai Dragons took on the Guangzhou Charge. Win for the Dragons. Pretty one-sided affair. Finally, move on to Sunday, June 30th, where we had 4 matches and my birthday. So that was, that was pretty nice. First match of the day was the LA Gladiators taking on the Vancouver Titans. That was my big pick match. The Titans win 4-0 and clinch the Pacific Division for the season, or for the Stage 3 playoffs, owning the tiebreaker with the Spark for beating them earlier this stage. So that is that. The Shock beat the Spitfire. Very one-sided affair. Shock walk away with a stage playoff clinched. Houston Outlaws beating the Toronto Defiant. I believe it was a 3-1. Houston Outlaws also lock up a spot in the stage playoffs. And the Seoul Dynasty beat the Chengdu Hunters and also lock up a spot in the stage playoffs. But we'll get to more stage playoff stuff in a little bit. Let's now jump in, though, to the picks for Week 5 at the Atlanta Homestand. We'll see if we can have another strong week of picks like I did last week, where we can go 4-0 on my big pick games and get 1 wrong, but I guess I can't go 4-0 on big pick games because there's only 2 this week. So let's look at Saturday, July 6th. First match of the week is the Florida Mayhem taking on the New York Excelsior. This is a match that if the New York Excelsior win, they lock up their spot in the Stage 3 playoffs, and they clinch the Atlantic Division for the Stage 3 playoffs. So it's a big game for them. It's an important match for them to win. I don't see them having much issue doing that against a struggling Florida Mayhem squad, though Florida Mayhem is looking a lot better than they were. Next, the Philadelphia Fusion take on the Washington Justice. I'm picking the Fusion. The Fusion are still in this playoff race. They have a very, very low chance of getting in. They need a lot of things to go their way for them to even get in. But never say never. They could always get in. They could always sneak their way in. But their chances are very low. But I think they will beat the Justice because I don't think the Justice are the strongest team right now. And though I believe that Justice beat the Fusion last time they played, I don't think the Fusion lose this time. Next, for my big pick game of Saturday, we have the Toronto Defiant taking on the Atlanta Reign. My eyes are peeled on this match because it is the hometown team, the Atlanta Reign, playing their first game in Atlanta against the Toronto Defiant. Dallas was crazy. A lot of really crazy matches at Dallas, and watching Dallas in front of the Dallas fans was insane. So I hope Atlanta is similar. I think the Reign beat the Defiant. I think both teams are kind of struggling a little bit, but I think the Reign have looked a little bit better. The Defiant definitely could win this one. I wouldn't be surprised if they won this one, but The Reign, in general, though they've been struggling this stage, have looked solid, and I think that there's a very good chance they walk away from this one with the win. Finally, we have the Guangzhou Charge taking on the Shanghai Dragons, a rematch of a match we just saw, and I think the Dragons win this one again. And if they win, they're also in the playoffs, so that would lock their spot up in the stage playoffs as well. So New York and Shanghai could close out the stage playoff teams with just a win. That's all they really need. Both teams could just win and be in. Next, move on to Sunday, where I have my big pick game for Sunday, which is the Philadelphia Fusion taking on the Shanghai Dragons. I'm picking the Dragons. I think they look better than the Fusion, and there's really not much more to it than that. Next, Guangzhou Charge take on the Washington Justice. I'm picking the Charge. This is the Justice's chance to keep their record of one match win per stage alive. I don't think it happens, though. I think the Charge are looking better, and I think that the Justice will struggle against the Charge because the Charge are also still alive in the playoff hunt. They're very far behind, but they are alive. They would need a lot to go their way to get in, but they're very much still alive. Next, the Atlanta Reign take on the Florida Mayhem. I'm picking the Atlanta Reign, as I think the Reign are looking a lot better than Florida still. The Mayhem are a very struggling team. I don't really think they have a ton going for them, so I am going to go with the Reign. The Mayhem just haven't impressed me enough, even with all these new roster changes. Finally, we have the New York Excelsior taking on the Toronto Defiant. Once again, very important match for them if they want to lock up the number one seed in the stage playoffs, which is very important. The number one seed so far this season in stage playoffs are undefeated. They haven't lost a single match. The number two seed, for example, has not won a single match in stage playoffs. They've been upset both rounds. New York was upset by Seoul. London was upset by Hangzhou. So if New York can lock up the number one seed, they put themselves in a very good position. Obviously, patterns like that don't really mean anything. New York could lose round one because this is a very good stage playoffs. Every team in the stage playoffs is phenomenal. It's a very good batch of teams. So definitely be on the lookout for that, but you have to look at what's going on with all these teams and, look at some of these patterns and trends. But New York over Toronto is my pick. I think Toronto is in a very weird position, and I don't really see them as a team right now that is in a prime position to beat the Excelsior. So that's it for my picks for week 5. Stage playoffs will be decided this week, the final 2 spots. But let's take a look now at the overall league standings, and there's quite a bit of movement in these standings. Obviously, we've seen those same 4 teams, now 5 teams in the Atlantic moving around a lot, with the Outlaws going from the bottom all the way up to number 4 in the Atlantic. They were below the Eternal, below the Uprising, below the Reign, below the Defiant. Now they have jumped up. The Reign and the Defiant will have chances to bump themselves up potentially even winning 2 games each and putting themselves ahead of the Outlaws, which would knock the Outlaws out of the top 13. They're right on the outside, and they need to get some wins to kind of help themselves out. This is a very, very big week, potentially for the Atlanta Reign to get themselves back into that contention for a playoff spot at the end of the season. They are currently sitting at 16, but they're 7-12. If they win 2 games, they're at 9-12, and they're tied with Chengdu. And if they win 2 games, they would actually have a better record than Chengdu, which would put them in 10th. So they would be on the inside, which would also bump the Los Angeles Valiant out of the top 12, which is really big as well because the Valiant have a very tough schedule in stage 4. They need all the help they can get from other teams losing. And then it'll put the Houston down to 14. Or Houston Outlaws at 14. The Toronto Defiant obviously could also find their way up to the top. They would need to win 2 very, very difficult games, though. So I don't really see that happening realistically. But even if Toronto wins 1 game or Atlanta wins 1 game, Atlanta has a very good differential for a team that's 7-12. They're only -6. So, I mean, if they win 1 match, they put themselves potentially above the Valiant, depending on the win and their loss. But they would put themselves ahead of Houston as well, almost guaranteed. So really big week for some of these teams to kind of keep themselves paced to get into that top 12 at the end of the season. We'll see what happens. But the other big change in the Atlantic Division is that the Philadelphia Fusion have now passed the London Spitfire. I don't expect that to last. Obviously, I don't think the Fusion will walk away from this week with 2 wins. But if they do, they put themselves ahead of the Spitfire in the overall standings and really keep their chances of making that stage playoffs alive, potentially even making the top 6. And I don't think they make the top 6. They're right now at 7. The top 6 currently are Vancouver, New York, San Francisco, Hangzhou, Gladiators, and Dragons. So they have a lot of work if they want to get into the top 6 and guarantee a playoff spot. But we'll see what they can do. And then in the Pacific Division, the Hangzhou Spark, the big movers there, overtaking the Los Angeles Gladiators. Dallas Fuel continue their plummet down towards the bottom of the standings. They are now negative with their record. The Chengdu Hunters, you can see, still kind of moving up, and the Valiant are trying to claw their way up as well. The Pacific Division is very competitive. It's very tough to see who even will be the teams that will move on. But the Valiant definitely have some work to be done if they want to be able to make the top 12 when the season ends. Let's take a look finally at the top 10 stage standings, where we can see what's going on there. So if none of the teams that are in contention lose, your playoff teams will be New York as the number 1 seed, Vancouver as number 2, Spark as the number 3, Dragons as the 4, Shock as the 5, Dynasty as the 6, Valiant as the 7, and Outlaws as the 8. Now, with some losses in there, things could change. If New York goes 6-1, then they'll be the 2 seed. Vancouver will be the 1 seed. If the Dragons lose a match, they could potentially be the 8 seed. There's a lot of things that could happen depending on teams that win or lose. So we'll have to keep our eyes out on that. But the Fusion are still in contention, the Gladiators as well as the Charge. Those are your teams that are still in contention for the stage playoffs. The Gladiators need a lot to go well for them. They would need the Dragons to lose both matches. That's their only way in. The Fusion would need to win all of their matches. And I believe they would need other stuff to happen as well for them to get in, because their differential isn't that great. New York would have to, I think, collapse, but even then, New York can't get below. I guess they could, depending on what happened. There's a chance. The Fusion have a chance. It's a very slim chance to get in. So those are your teams that are competing right now to get in the stage playoffs, but there's only 2 spots up for grabs, and New York and Shanghai have relatively easy paths to get there. So I expect New York and Shanghai to lock up their spots and be in the positions that we see them in currently in the standings. But that is everything. Those are all the picks. I'll give some little fun picks, I guess, because we know about the Defran versus Bren Widowmaker Challenge and the Defran versus Mangachu Torb Hammer 1v1. I'm saying Defran wins the Torb Hammer 1v1. I'm saying Baby Bay wins the Widowmaker thing. Those don't count as any real picks. We'll see what happens. But that is now actually everything I have for you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing. Check out the playlist at the end of this video for more of these videos if you want to see them. But I'm going to get out of here. Once again, thank you, and I'll see you all next time.